Akatosh Auriel, or in the dragon tongue Bor-ma-hu, which means our father. These are all names of the same god, the most well-known deity in all of Tamriel, the Aedra, known as the Great Dragon of Time. He's present in nearly every religion across Tamriel, declared the chief god of the empire, and the very first deity in most creation myths. But is Akatosh really as good and virtuous as we think he is? Or, as Mankar Camoran claims in Oblivion, is he actually a divine being with an obsession for obedience, one who tricked mortals into needing him? Maybe you're already remembering Oblivion and getting ready to argue with me. But personally, I don't believe Akatosh is as innocent, noble, or pure as we've been led to believe. And in this video, I'll try to show you why, using both lore and speculation. So sit back and let's dig into the question: is Akatosh a two-faced god? Before we get started, if you enjoy my Elder Scrolls lore videos, feel free to like this video and subscribe to the channel to support me. And don't hesitate to share your thoughts in the comments. Your ideas help shape future videos. Just like in my previous videos, I'll be following a two-part structure. First, we'll go over who Akatosh is and how he's portrayed in different cultures. Then, in the second part, we'll dive into the debate. Is he really a deceiver who fooled all of Tamriel? I hope you enjoy the video. Let's get started. Chief God Akatosh. Alongside the lost god Lorkhan and the mother goddess Mara, Akatosh is one of the three deities found in nearly every religion across Tamriel. He's also the chief god of the divines. In the very first act of creation, born from the clash between Anu and Padome, Akatosh was the first Aedra to come into being, and with his arrival, the concept of time itself was born. The existence of time brought structure to a chaotic, unstable universe. It set boundaries that made everything that came afterward possible. That's why I always think of Akatosh and time as inseparable, like two sides of the same coin. Time is Akatosh and Akatosh is time. Because of this deep connection, he's often referred to as the dragon god of time in many cultures across Tamriel. If you're not familiar with Akatosh, the whole dragon thing might come as a surprise. But yes, Akatosh is believed to be the father of all dragons. In fact, in the dragon language, he's called Bor-ma-hu, which means our father. This belief especially shapes the Akatosh pantheon in Nord and Khajiit cultures. In Skyrim, the main antagonist, Alduin, is known in Nord mythology as Akatosh's firstborn. Because of this, Alduin sees himself as superior to all other dragons. Eventually, he declares himself a god, believing he's the living embodiment of Akatosh's obsession with absolute control and domination. But when Alduin decides to conquer all of Tamriel, his brother, the great dragon Paarthurnax, turns against him, leading to a major conflict between them. I'll come back to that later in the video, so I won't go into too much detail now. But because of these events, there's a kind of identity confusion in Nord mythology between Alduin and Akatosh. This is known as the Alduin-Akatosh dichotomy. To avoid any confusion, I should also talk about the whole multiple names situation. Akatosh is actually the name used for the dragon god of time in Cyrodiilic culture. After the Merethic era ended, when Saint Alessia successfully led the rebellion against the Aelids and founded the first human empire, a new religion spread across the empire's territories. This belief system became known as the Eight Divines. In this religion, Akatosh appeared as a sort of fusion between Auriel and Alduin. But honestly, the connection between Akatosh and Alduin is pretty superficial. Auriel is the name Akatosh takes in the Aldmeri pantheon, and pretty much every theologian, except for the most extreme ones, agrees that Akatosh and Auriel are just different names for the same divine being. In Khajiiti myth, Akatosh shows up as Alkosh. There, he's called the Great Cat King of Time, or the First Cat. In murals and wall carvings, he's often shown as a fearsome dragon. Looking at the whole Elder Scrolls universe, I think we can all agree by now. Akatosh is one of the most important and widely respected divine figures out there. Sure, that view shifts a bit depending on the culture, like with the Dunmer or Orsimer, but even their religions still show traces of Akatosh in some form. For example, the Dunmer once worshipped the three good Daedra, and later the tribunal gods. One of those tribunal members, Almalexia, shares a lot of traits with Akatosh, like immortality, a connection to history, and keeping records of bloodlines. Though ironically, Almalexia ends up losing her 1,000-year reign as a living god by dying at our hands, which is the strongest proof she wasn't a true god to begin with. But hey, that's a whole topic for another video. Dragon breaks. A dragon break is a strange and confusing phenomenon where linear time completely falls apart and turns into something non-linear. The term dragon in its name comes from Akatosh, the dragon god of time. But a dragon break doesn't just affect the flow of time, it actually challenges the very way mortals understand it. Tamriel scholars describe it as a catastrophic disruption of linear time. Put simply, it's when time and space realign in response to an event so massive that normal reality can't continue as it was. Dragon breaks are a huge deal. They've happened more than once in Tamriel's history, and honestly, the topic is big enough for its own dedicated video. Bethesda uses this idea in the games to explain open-ended choices. So when a dragon break happens, it allows all possible outcomes to exist at the same time. Yep, you heard that right. Every possible decision actually happens, and each one branches off into its own timeline. Except for the Tribunal and a few chosen supernatural beings, pretty much everyone else affected by a dragon break gets totally lost in it. People don't even realize it happened. They just feel this overwhelming sense of mental and emotional distress. One of the most well-known effects is that people tend to forget the event entirely, or even deny it ever happened. Events that take place during a dragon break often show up in historical records in totally different and even contradictory ways. That's why, in the Elder Scrolls universe, we don't have solid, agreed-upon facts about many historical events. So no matter what topic we're talking about, even the ones I cover on this channel, just remember, we're always standing on shaky ground. And while we explore Akatosh in this video, keep in mind that this uncertainty is built into the very nature of Elder Scrolls lore. So why did I bring up the dragon break? Because Akatosh, who's literally defined as time itself, is known for being fixed, unmoving, and centered. That's why he often finds himself in conflict with the Daedric princes, who represent chaos and unpredictability. Akatosh's obsession with stability and continuity in a chaotic universe can sometimes lead to disasters that affect mortals in terrifying ways. And that's exactly what a dragon break is. It's a result of Akatosh temporarily losing control over the flow of time, something the mortal mind just isn't built to handle. Now, I know what you might be thinking. These breaks aren't Akatosh's fault. It's the result of someone activating Numidium, or maybe the work of some Daedra. And sure, that's one way to look at it, but it's not the way I want you to look at it. Dragon breaks always happen when the order of things is seriously disrupted. But whose order are we talking about here? This whole system, founded on obedience, stability, and control, is Akatosh's system. And when that system is threatened, this phenomenon kicks in almost like a built-in defense mechanism. So what we're really seeing here isn't some noble act of selflessness or compassion. What we see is a god who's willing to sacrifice huge chunks of mortal time just to preserve his own existence and the cosmic order he represents. Don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to exaggerate or say Akatosh is evil. I'm not blaming him for anything. I'm just laying the groundwork for us to ask the real question. Is Akatosh selfish, controlling, and maybe even indifferent to mortals? And honestly, the dragon break, where people can lose years of their lives without even knowing, felt like a gentle place to start asking that question. Now let's keep going step by step. Akatosh, the obedience freak. One thing I should point out is that most of the written records about Akatosh and Tamriel come directly from his priests. That means the popular narrative we've all heard is largely shaped by them. And like I've said over and over, nothing in the Elder Scrolls universe is ever truly objective. Everyone tells their version of the story based on their own political or religious views. So, with this video, I'm not trying to present a final truth. I just want to open up some space to question who Akatosh really is. Despite what we're often told, Akatosh is actually a very complex figure. He might come off as a well-meaning, noble deity, but his nature is much more complicated than that. He openly demands obedience, duty, and service from his followers. And that raises a serious question. Is he really just a good god, or is he actually authoritarian and self-centered? This controlling and self-important side of him shows up in several stories. It's just not something his priests usually highlight. Let's take one of the so-called greatest blessings Akatosh gave to Tamriel, his pact with Saint Alessia. Akatosh played a huge role in the founding of the First Human Empire and in creating the imperial religion we now know as the Nine Divines. Before Alessia's empire was established, there was no barrier between Mundus and Oblivion. That meant Tamriel was kind of like an open door. Daedra could slip through whenever they wanted and cause chaos. This changed only after the founding of the Alessian Empire and the pact made with Akatosh. Slave Alessia, crushed under the cruelty of the Aelids, eventually rose up and built a new order, and in the stories she was blessed by Akatosh himself. It's said that Akatosh, moved by the suffering of mankind, gave Alessia the Amulet of Kings, an artifact said to be formed from his own heart's blood, thereby blessing her with dragon blood. This pact created a permanent barrier between Oblivion and Mundus. But of course, Akatosh didn't do this out of pure charity. There was a condition. For that barrier to stay in place, someone from Alessia's dragonborn bloodline had to wear the Amulet of Kings and sit on the imperial throne. So you can see what's happening here. Akatosh ties the future of the human empire directly to a bloodline descended from him. In other words, he's locking in his own authority, ensuring his influence continues. You might wonder, well, why doesn't Akatosh just rule things himself? I actually talked about this in a previous video, but the short version is, the Aedra lose their power when they physically enter Tamriel. That's why Akatosh can't directly rule, but he can install a representative on the throne. Here's the absurd part. If someone not of Akatosh's blood sits on the throne, there's no protection from the forces of Oblivion. So, Akatosh, do you really care about protecting mortals, or do you just want an empire full of people who obey you without question? Anyway, with that agreement in place, Akatosh's version of the empire became permanently embedded in the lives of everyone across the continent. Obeying the empire suddenly also meant obeying part of Akatosh himself. Which brings us to the next part, the 5 commands of Akatosh. There's a book, author unknown, that lays out the commands of the 9 divines in the Imperial Pantheon, and honestly, it's been taught to pretty much everyone across Tamriel, whether they're faithful or not. Among these teachings are 5 specific commands that all worshippers of Akatosh are expected to follow. Now, whether these actually came from Akatosh himself or were created as some form of imperial propaganda, well, that's something we'll probably never know. But if we want to understand Akatosh's nature and where the potential problems might lie, I think these 5 commands are a pretty solid place to start. Serve and obey your emperor, study the covenant, worship the 9, perform your duties, heed the commands of saints and priests. These 5 rules clearly lay out what Akatosh expects from us mortals. Duty, service, and obedience are not just encouraged, they're at the core of his teachings. Hierarchy and order are treated as sacred, which makes sense, right? These are all values tied directly to the concept of time. From these commands come traits often associated with Akatosh, like invincibility, endurance, and absolute loyalty. That's why, in Imperial culture, anything endorsed or blessed by Akatosh is automatically seen as righteous. No questions asked. Don't challenge, just obey. Who are you to argue? And that feeling of helplessness in the face of Akatosh. It mirrors the same helplessness we all feel when it comes to time itself. But this attitude, obey without question, I say how things are, can become dangerous when interpreted too literally by his followers. And we saw the most extreme example of this firsthand in Skyrim. Alduin, the main villain, is basically the living embodiment of Akatosh's obsession with control and obedience. He went completely off the rails, deciding it was his duty to make all of Tamriel kneel before him. Forever. So yeah, before we lose track, let me sum up why these 5 commands raise red flags for me. Yes, Akatosh has saved us in critical moments, but maybe not because he's some loving, generous god. Maybe it's because he wants to protect the system he built, a system that doesn't really allow space for a secular emperor or any other kind of belief. In fact, his protection always seems to come with strings attached. If you want safety, you follow his structure, especially that whole only someone of dragon blood can sit on the throne thing. That's where, in my opinion, Akatosh really crosses the line. Dragons and Akatosh's desire to rule. We've already talked about how Akatosh is known as the father of dragons, and you can actually see that reflected in how he's depicted. In Cyrodiil, there's a statue of him with 2 heads, one human, one dragon. And at the end of Oblivion, when Martin Septim transforms into Akatosh's avatar to defeat Mehrunes Dagon, we literally see him merge with a golden dragon. That's Akatosh. So let's dive deeper into this dragon connection, and how his desire for control shows up in the very creatures that are said to be part of his divine power. If you've played the Elder Scrolls Online, especially the Elsewhere expansion, you probably noticed that both dragons and Akatosh are central themes. In the Dragonhold questline, a dragon named Nafalar tells us that dragons have something called Fenjuntid, a will to dominate. It's part of their nature, and if dragons are truly reflections of Akatosh, his children, even fragments of his essence, then it makes sense to say that their desire to rule comes straight from Akatosh himself. To make this point even clearer, let's go back to a more familiar example. Skyrim. Think about Alduin's return, the power of the voice, the Greybeards. It all eventually leads us to the Dragon War, a major part of ancient Nord history. Back in the First Era, the ancestors of the Nords lived under the rule of dragons in Skyrim. The dragons saw mortals as their servants and selected priests from among them, known as dragon priests, to help enforce their rule. Whenever people stepped out of line, they were either burned alive or torn apart. That's the kind of divine order we're talking about here. Thankfully, with the help of another Aedra, Kyne, and Alduin's own brother Paarthurnax, humans learned the art of the voice and rebelled. They managed to defeat the dragons. Of course, Alduin is immortal, so thousands of years later he eventually came back, at a time of his choosing, to threaten all of existence once again. But before we get deeper into Alduin, let's stop and look at something his brother Paarthurnax says during Skyrim.
I am as my father Akatosh made me, as are you, Dovahkiin.
Then he adds,
Dov Walan Farel, we were made to dominate. The will to power is in our blood. You feel it in yourself, do you not?
Even though Paarthurnax helps us, he's not entirely innocent either. He's still a dragon. He just managed to restrain his lust for power and dominance. And if you choose not to kill him in the game, he continues to teach other dragons how to do the same after Alduin is defeated. But he always makes one thing clear.
No day goes by where I am not tempted to return to my inborn nature. Zimgrifhorvut se Suyech.
Alduin. When we talk about Akatosh, we have to bring up Alduin. He's a major figure in the Nord pantheon, known as the World Eater or the First Dragon. The question of whether Alduin and Akatosh are the same being has been debated for generations. In the Imperial Pantheon, formed as a blend of Elven and Nord beliefs, Akatosh is presented as the embodiment of time and pure goodness. But Alduin? He's seen as the god of time and the end of all things. Basically, he's the bringer of the apocalypse. But here's the interesting part. Even though Alduin's purpose is to bring about the end of time, that's also what makes a new beginning possible. Everything must end so something new can begin. Now, the whole First Dragon title can be confusing, because both Akatosh and Alduin are described as first. According to Imperial scholars, the Nord's Alduin is their version of Akatosh. In fact, there's even a book called the Alduin-Akatosh Dichotomy that argues the two are the same being. But then you've got books like Alduin is Real, which claim that Akatosh is more like a spiritual force, a dragon soul, while Alduin is a flesh and blood dragon. Because of that, the book argues they can't be the same. That argument also leans on comparing their actions. And honestly, when it comes to Elder Scrolls mythology, it's nearly impossible to say anything with absolute certainty, especially when dealing with divine beings. But even if they're not exactly the same, it's fair to say that Alduin is a reflection of Akatosh, a part of him, or maybe even his firstborn. Alduin's goal is to end the world, to wipe out all life and bring the current cycle to a close, so a new one can begin. But when he returns to the mortal world, he gives in to that deep desire to dominate. Instead of destroying everything, he chooses to enslave people and rule over them. And that's really where the cruelty of dragons comes from. Their original purpose may have been tied to the natural cycle of destruction and rebirth, but when Alduin goes off course, it becomes something much darker, something oppressive. So why do we keep connecting Alduin, this ruthless god of the Nord pantheon, to Akatosh? Well, there are a few possible reasons. For one, Alduin calls himself the firstborn of Akatosh. That's something backed up by multiple sources. Even Paarthurnax says it outright, which, like we talked about earlier, suggests that Alduin represents a specific aspect of Akatosh. If we accept that, then the version of Akatosh described in the Imperial Pantheon, this symbol of pure, unwavering good, starts to fall apart. Instead, what we see is a cosmic duality, a god who represents both creation and destruction. There's also another theory, one that compares Akatosh to the Hindu god Purusha, who shattered himself to bring creation into existence. In this view, Akatosh broke himself into pieces to create the dragons. And if that's true, then it means all dragons are Akatosh, and Akatosh is all dragons. That would also mean Akatosh experiences the flow of time through his dragons. In this interpretation, he's not one conscious being, but rather a scattered or fragmented consciousness. And that actually helps explain both dragons and dragonborn. Think about it, how does a dragonborn absorb the soul, power, and knowledge of a slain dragon? It's really just a broken soul slowly being pieced back together. This idea could also help redeem Akatosh to some extent. If his essence was scattered at the beginning of time, it makes sense that those fragments would develop different purposes, maybe even conflicting ones. That would explain how the same divine being could help Martin Septim save the world and send Alduin to destroy it. I hope I haven't confused you too much. Both of these perspectives are honestly fascinating to me, especially the second one. There's a kind of mysticism to it that makes the Elder Scrolls universe feel even deeper, and it adds real weight to the whole Alduin and Dragonborn storyline. And here's another interesting possibility. Maybe Akatosh sent the last Dragonborn to stop Alduin, not out of mercy, but to keep the time cycle running as it's supposed to. There's even some support for this idea in the writings of Michael Kirkbride. Maybe Akatosh delayed the end of the current cycle by sending the Dragonborn to stop his own mirror, Alduin, until the right time comes for it all to end. Akatosh and Lorkhan. Lorkhan, the lost god, the trickster, and the very soul of Nirn, the mortal realm. Sure, elves might see him as a deceiver and an enemy, but for the human races of Tamriel, he's considered their ancestor. And personally, I believe that without Lorkhan, the mortal world, Mundus, wouldn't even exist. I won't go deep into Lorkhan's full story in this video, but what you need to know is this. He either convinced or tricked the other Aedra into helping him create the mortal plane. That's seen as a bad thing because during the creation of the world, the Aedra lost much of their power. Now, according to elven mythology, Auriel, who represents Akatosh in their pantheon, was originally against the idea of creating Mundus. But guess what? As soon as Lorkhan promised that Auriel would be crowned king of this new world, suddenly he was on board. That's why I keep saying Akatosh has an obsession with power and control. Of course, the story goes that once Auriel realized Lorkhan had tricked him, he had his champion Tyrant kill Lorkhan. But even then, he couldn't destroy Lorkhan's heart, so instead, he shot it like an arrow across the land, scattering it throughout Tamriel. Now, I want to share a more controversial theory with you. It's a bit wild, but honestly, with how the Elder Scrolls universe works, even the craziest ideas have a place. Plus, these kinds of theories always lead to fun debates among fans. According to this theory, Akatosh might secretly want to unmake Mundus altogether, basically undo the deal he made with Lorkhan. Some versions even suggest that Akatosh might want to become a Daedra. The theory claims that Akatosh, like the other Aedra, regrets the sacrifice of his full immortality and is uncomfortable with the existence of Mundus itself. If that's true, then maybe all of Akatosh's goodness is conditional, just a means to an end. Of course, this is very speculative, but still, it's an interesting idea to think about. And in the world of Elder Scrolls lore, even the craziest theories can sometimes hold a little truth. The Alduin-Akatosh Dichotomy. Here's something that might be messing with your head a bit. If the chief god of the elves and the chief god of the empire are actually the same being, then why does this god help the elves rule over humans in one era and then help the humans crush the elves in another? And yeah, it really happened. During the Merithic era, the elves ruled over humans, believing they had the divine support of Auriel. But later, the Empire rose to power thanks to a pact made directly with Akatosh, and eventually took control of the entire continent, pushing the elves back. Now, while most sources say that Auriel and Akatosh are just different cultural names for the same being, there are some theories that suggest otherwise. One idea proposes that Auriel is the version of the god untouched by human influence, while Akatosh has been mantled by human rulers, meaning his divine role has been reshaped through human belief and leadership. If that's true, it could explain why Auriel led the elves during the Dawn era, and why Akatosh later became more human-aligned. We also know that during the Alessian Empire, there was a serious push to reduce elven influence over Akatosh and replace it with human ideals. As more people across the Empire began worshipping him as their chief god, it's possible Akatosh gradually took on a more pro-human stance. This idea really shows how divine morality in the Elder Scrolls universe isn't fixed. It's fluid, shaped by culture, belief, and history. Sounds weird? Maybe. But think about it. Aedra and Daedra actually come from the same primordial source. And if Daedra can change their behavior based on the people who worship them, why couldn't the Aedra? To me, this is where the idea of pure goodness starts to break down. It's also where the teachings of the First Empire's priests, who insisted Akatosh was the ultimate force of good, start to lose their weight. Just to be clear, I'm not saying Akatosh is evil. I mean, this is the god who merged with Martin Septim and saved all of Tamriel. I love that moment. What I'm saying is that the Empire may have twisted a few things to fit their narrative, and maybe Akatosh's goodness isn't some fixed natural trait, but something that can shift over time. Things like his pact with Alessia, the enforcement of a bloodline-based monarchy, and his favoritism toward humans really make me think Akatosh isn't quite the flawless divine being we've been told he is. Akatosh's indifference. Finally, I want to talk about one more thing that really bothers me when it comes to Akatosh. And again, this isn't about calling him evil. I'm just trying to challenge the idea that he's truly the embodiment of pure good. Earlier, I mentioned Trinamac, Akatosh's champion. He was the one who struck down Lorkhan and ripped out his heart. But later on, during a time when the elves hadn't yet split into different sub-races, a group of elves decided to abandon their Aedra-worshipping ways and migrate deeper into Tamriel. They followed a leader named Veloth, and this group would eventually be known as the Chimera. They were guided by the Daedric prince Boethia. Trinamac tried to stop them. He stepped in to prevent this shift from happening. but according to common belief, Boethia beat him down, humiliated him, and literally tore him apart. After that, Trinimac transformed, or was cursed, into a new Daedric prince, Malakath. And today, Malakath is the primary deity worshipped by the Orsimer, the Orcs. So while all this chaos was going on, while his own knight was being humiliated and twisted into something else, what did Akatosh do? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Now look, maybe there's some hidden story behind the scenes that we don't know about. And if that's the case, I admit it's not fair to judge. But based on the information we do have, Akatosh comes off as kind of indifferent. Sometimes he's all-powerful and deeply involved. Other times he's completely silent, like he's not even there. And to me, that inconsistency really challenges the whole idea of him being a perfectly benevolent god. One idea I find really fascinating is that Akatosh's nature might actually be shaped by mortal belief. And if that's true, if he really is spiritually linked to Alduin as both creator and destroyer, then maybe Akatosh isn't a god of just order and protection, but a cosmic balance between creation and destruction, between order and chaos. That seems to be how many mortal cultures across Tamriel perceive him. And it makes me wonder, are the evil or lesser-known sides of Akatosh actually flaws? Or are they just reflections of time's own contradictions and dualities? Personally, I don't believe Akatosh is a being of pure good. Whether his actions are protective or destructive, he's not driven by kindness, he's driven by the need to maintain cosmic balance. And a nature like that can't be defined as pure good. It just doesn't fit. So after everything we've talked about, I think it's clear. Akatosh is not your typical benevolent god. His version of goodness is wrapped up in demands for obedience, duty, and loyalty to a fixed order. Just like time itself, he's not simple. He's complex. There's also an authoritarian side to him, one that exists to uphold the stability of time and, by extension, his own existence. That's not evil necessarily, but it's certainly not selfless. And if Akatosh really is less of a singular being and more of a shared consciousness shattered into pieces, then that might explain why his different representations act so differently. His connection with Alduin, whether as a firstborn or mirror twin, shows that creation and destruction aren't opposites for Akatosh. They're two sides of the same divine force. Alduin's role as the World Eater suggests that the ending of time itself is part of Akatosh's plan, part of the cycle, which means that Akatosh, the so-called divine protector, might also be the one carefully managing when it's all supposed to fall apart. And there you have it. We've explored how the imperial priesthood's monopoly over religion may have distorted what we know about Akatosh, and more importantly, what they haven't told us. These hidden sides might come from his paradoxical nature, or maybe they reflect an identity shaped by mortal belief, or perhaps they're just the byproducts of a divine mission to keep the cycle of time moving. Personally, I don't see Akatosh as a god of kindness and virtue. I see him as a god of balance. But hey, I'm just a mortal too. And at the end of the day, we have to admit something. Like all Aedra and Daedra, Akatosh operates on a scale far beyond our mortal ideas of good and evil. And that's it for this video. I hope it helped open a new window of thought for you when it comes to Akatosh. Based on everything we've discussed, I'd really love to hear what you think. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed it. If you want to see more videos about the divine lore of the Elder Scrolls universe, feel free to share your suggestions as well. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.